First, good morning. I'm Bob Bullock. I'm Deputy Director for Operations here at the Nelson A. Rockefeller Institute of Government, the public policy research arm of the State University of New York. On behalf of our Director, Tom Gaze, who you will see shortly, and our board and staff, we thank you for joining us here today for this very important conference on local governments. Since the inception of the Rockefeller Institute more than 30 years ago, the challenges facing New York's local governments, and indeed state and local governments nationally, have been at the heart of the work of the Institute. And in many regards, there have been few champions for this research on local governments quite as accomplished or as passionate as your conference organizer, Mike Hattery. It is for this reason that Mike serves as our Director of Local Government Studies. Several months ago, Mike and Tom Gaze came up with the idea of reprising the work that had begun at the Institute and was previously known as the New York State Network for Economic Research, or NYSNR. Having reviewed the list of attendees today, I see the names of many who have been integrally involved with NYSNR's work and our work on local governments. Throughout the course of the day, we look forward to the presentations by colleagues from throughout the SUNY system and beyond, and we thank you all for your support of today as both presenters and attendees. It is our hope that through our event today and our collective ongoing research in this area, practitioners in our local governments will be better equipped to face the formidable challenges before them today. In closing, we wish you the very best for Thanksgiving, the holiday season, and the new year ahead, and we look forward to seeing you at future Institute events. And now, with administrative remarks and to kick off a conference for which he was uniquely responsible, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Hattery. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. I got a pair of eye surgeries about a month ago, and this is the first time I've been at a podium trying to read and look at people at the same time since I had that happen. So forgive me if I look like I'm going crazy up here with my eyes. Let me reiterate one thing, and that is that I think since its founding in 1982, the Institute has had a strong history of local government research and policy involvement. And I think it's our interest at this time to reinvigorate and invigorate that work in cooperation with the really broad range of partners we have in the state. And I think one of the things that you realize when you're kind of at the bottom end of the government scale at local government, I didn't say the least important, but at the bottom end of the scale, is that state policy shapes both your available resources and the regulatory framework that you have to operate in. It creates an environment for local governments and either hinders or helps your ability to serve the communities that you represent. And I think that's only made difficult by the range, both policymaking and research about local government is made difficult by the range of challenges that we have because of size and cost and complexity in New York. And this event was designed to help bridge both research and policy practice conversation in New York State and improve the insights that both parties have to share. Researchers and practitioners and policy folks have a lot to share with one another, and we want to try to help create a bridge for that. So please keep that in mind as we move through the day today. The questions you have in your mind, please ask them, whether it's in a session or outside. The folks that we have presenting, I'm sure would love to hear your thoughts and or questions about what they have to say. And please give us some thoughts about how we can be valuable to this joint research policy audience moving forward. We'll be doing an evaluation online after the event. We have a pretty packed day, so we didn't try to cram that into your work for the day. But please keep that in mind. And if you have suggestions about how we can work better together across that spectrum, please let us know. The materials from today's event will be posted on our event website in the not too distant future. Before we start the first panel, let me give you a list of housekeeping items. Please turn your cell phones off or to vibrate. Because we have a pretty packed house, I want to remind you about the fire exits. Most of you came up the front stairwell. That's a fire exit. If you go out the hallway to the left, as you go through that door, or just off of this door, go down that hallway. There's a set of stairs that is also a fire exit. Restroom needs, you need to go down a flight to the first floor past the reception desk. We have a set of publications out here in the hallway that are free and can be replenished, so don't worry about the number there if you're interested in one of them. We're going to, and this is a general comment for our sessions today, following our panel's presentations, we're going to have a opportunity for Q&A. Because we try to keep everything on mic, we'll have the ability to bring those mics around to you where you are, so please wait till the mic gets to you. We'll try to have people facilitating that. Okay, we have one panel this morning that I'm going to introduce, followed by lunch, and then we'll have 3 panels this afternoon. So we're going to try to wrap this up around 11:50. Bob, did I forget any critical details there? Okay. Our first panel is on cases of local government innovation and change in New York. In the early 90s, I think, dating myself now, I read a piece in Public Administration Review called Do Physicists Do Case Studies? And I thought they made a very good case for the fact that there's a lot to be learned in working directly in a group of organizations or region, and particularly using a case study approach. But I think the same holds true for people that are working on concrete projects to help bring change and improvement to local government. And I think each of our 3 presenters this morning will help bring us to that. Our first presentation is on combating urban blight in the Capital Region and Mohawk Valley, the Shared Code Enforcement Information Resource Pilot Project. And Meghan Cook is going to handle that presentation. She's the program director for the Center for Technology and Government at the University of Albany. We have a booklet of brief bios. I'm not going to give a brief bio for every speaker here, but I encourage you to take a look at that. We have some folks with a lot of experience and a range of experience, including Meghan. The second presentation on this panel is going to be by Jerry Benjamin from the, what is now the Benjamin, blanking on got myself lost here, Benjamin Center, which was formerly CREO. He's a vice president for regional engagement at SUNY New Paltz. And he's going to be joined by KT Tobin and Tom Cetrino, who also work with the Benjamin Center on the project, Albany County Intergovernmental Cooperation. And then third, Robert Shibley from the western edge of the empire, the dean of the University of Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning, and the director of the University of Buffalo Regional Institute is going to talk about data and action, models in regional planning from Western New York. So, Meghan, will you get us started?
Sure.
Thanks.
So I guess this means I'm standing at the podium, right?
Pull that out if you want.
Yeah, right here is good. Okay. So when does my 12 minutes start? I saw the timesheets that Bob had. So, hello, my name is Meghan Cook. I'm from the Center for Technology and Government at the University at Albany. Before I start, I would just like to recognize the folks I'm here with, Derek Worthmuller and Megan Sutherland. Can you just raise your hand from the Senate, from CTG? And also give a shout out, the room is big enough for a shout out, to the folks from the Department of State, because they are the reason that we can talk about this project. It was funded by them, so we're really excited that they're here. So our project is called Addressing Urban Blight Through Regional Information Sharing. And I'm going to get into that, but I'm going to talk a little bit about who CTG is. So CTG is one of the five freestanding centers within the University at Albany. So we do not report to any one academic department, but we draw on all of them. Our staff are in the faculty of Information Science, Public Administration, and Computer Science. But we also have visiting scholars from all over the world and from many different departments, criminal justice, sociology, and draw on students, both undergraduate and graduate, within our center. And so there's always a mix of disciplines there working together on these public policy problems. So why this project? Why this topic, addressing urban blight? We work with governments all over New York State, and one of the things we'd heard over and over again is the amount of money being spent on blighted and vacant properties. Now, we believe that part of this problem is an information problem. People say, I can't get my hands on the information in order to develop strategies. So we decided to help the cities come together and apply for a grant. They said, we want to apply to the Local Government Efficiency Grant in order to develop our capability and our capacity to generate information, to develop strategies to address blight. And so, as you'll see up on this slide, one of the things we did in the very beginning was document the cost categories of blight. One of the things when you're getting funding is to say, how much is it costing you now? And so with 2 of the cities, we sat down, we developed all of the cost categories, and then dug into the data. And you'll see this several times in a brute force way. That means you roll up your sleeves, it's not aggregated in any system, and you pull it together and you figure out how much is being spent on properties that are blighted or vacant. One of the things that we've learned, at least in the 4 cities that you'll see, is that from the first signs of blight to vacancy is about 5 to 7 years. So if you take the costs that you're spending each year and you calculate it over the life of that, it's tens of millions of dollars. So we believe that there's an information challenge here, and CTG focuses on the area of information, technology, management, and policy. So in order to generate information, you have to make the investment in the systems, in the data collection. People want to share information across regions. It determines on how you invest in that. One mayor said, unfortunately, I awarded the sale of a property to a person in a city 20 miles away, and they had 4 properties in that city that they had let gone into decline, and I had no way of knowing. There's no place for me to go search that. I can pick up the phone and call, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. So is there a way to share information across regions? The other part that we've learned right along with the cities is that code enforcement data, and when we'll talk about what that means, is the cornerstone of that information sharing. And code enforcement data means something different depending on where you sit. So this is what we believe to be true. In order to use information, do data analytics, you have to manage it, collect it, and have standards. There needs to be a baseline for that. But in order to have that, you need to delve into the systems that you use, the policies, the practices, the definitions, the formats. So these are the basic ideas that we've been working with 4 capital region cities over the last few months. So as you see, the city of Amsterdam, Gloversville, Schenectady, and Troy came together, and we've been doing, for lack of better words, information sharing and requirements gathering over the last several months. But the project goals were pretty straightforward. Number 1, build the technical and organizational capabilities within the 4 cities as it relates to code enforcement. That's not just systems, that's understanding of how code enforcement is carried out. Develop the technical, data, and policy foundation of an information resource. Now, we call it resource on purpose because if you say platform, everybody has an idea of what that is. Our job was to help them figure out, what do you want to share? How do you want to share it? Encourage uniformity in process and definition. We'll talk about how that's already happened through some of these workshops. And create a culture of knowledge sharing and community, at least across these 4 cities, and determine how we can make that a farther reach. So launching these types of efforts requires a lot of together time. If you look at these 3 past projects, these were all prototypes that started at our Applied Research Center at UAlbany. The New York State Kids Wellbeing Indicators Clearinghouse was an effort by the Council on Children and Families not to have to produce a book of health and well-being data, but rather collect it throughout the counties and present it in a way that was understandable and manageable. The eJustice Integrated Portal, we helped bring together and develop the governance structure of what that would look like of justice agencies working together. And the New York State GIS Clearinghouse, I hope you've all heard of that, started out as a prototype of people from counties who were interested in getting access at each other's GIS data. So setting up the governance of that. What are the rules? Who's going to make the decisions? So when you do an effort like this, you really have to look at all the stakeholders. And when you're talking about urban blight, everyone's coming at it in a very different perspective. So if you just take a look at this snapshot, we were getting many calls from international organizations, from banks and insurance companies, in the city departments. Code enforcement has a very different need than the mayor's office. They want to see data in a different way. Foundations, academic institutions who are either experts in urban planning or experts in urban blight, and those who are experts in data, process, and information like CTG. So we were mapping the world to start saying, let's start bringing these groups of people together. Strangely enough, or maybe not, the New York State fire chiefs understand that investment in the infrastructure in the cities will help them get the information that they need. Because they want a certain type of information to the firemen, but they understand if it's not collected and managed in the correct way, it's not going to get there. And so they've been very involved and very supportive of this project. But how do you build capability? These are a lot of dimensions. Governance, understanding data assets, performance evaluation. We developed this model, which is being used in several federal agencies as a way to assess readiness for information sharing. We're focusing in the first couple of months of this local project in the area of requirements gathering and understanding the data. But we've done stakeholder identification, we've teetered on technology acceptance and thinking about what the world could look like for code enforcement within these cities. As a way to organize the work, you have 4 cities, you have administrators, code enforcement officials, mayor's office, finance people from 4 different cities. How are you going to talk about addressing urban blight? And so we organized the work into these 5 programs. I'm not going to read them all to you, but they were sets of actions that the city was carrying out in order to address blight. We figured out a way to categorize addressing blight, avoiding, mitigating in progress, and resolving the worst, and tried to place those programs in those 3 areas. Because many of these cities were relying heavily on the land banks, which is very important. But the land banks are interested in resolving the worst. So once people could see where they were fitting into the larger scheme, they would say, okay, I know that I want to invest time in the avoiding blight, and the land banks are working to resolve. And it may be an oversimplification, but it helps people understand where they sit and what their role is in the process. So everything that people say they want to know about information sharing falls into these 3 categories: properties, people, and work practices. And you're going to have the slides, so I'm not going to read all of them, but we, through a series of information identification, determined who wants what. And this is a scary chart that you can't read, but I brought copies with me, okay? And essentially what it does is says about properties, about people, about work practices. We took the main questions that we heard on all of those 3 and layered it with questions that were coming from within the Building and Codes Department, questions that were coming within the locality, maybe the mayor's office, maybe the director of development, maybe zoning and planning, and then across the region. What are people saying from regional organizations, from the Attorney General's office to the Department of State? What are the questions that they're saying? And they fall into those 3 categories. So people say, why focus on code enforcement? That was one of the questions we got in addressing urban blight. Because developing the capability in the systems, in the infrastructure, in code enforcement allows you to have some of that data to inform answering these questions. So some projects will do a visualization of data, and I always say, but you had it to start with. So what if you don't have it to start with? We're working on building the capability for them to have it in a place that allows them to do analysis. We were also talking about owner information. If you talk to enough people and they say, my biggest information need is owner information, you say, stop. Let's stop and talk about this. What does it mean to you? And we came up with all of these data elements and then asked people to go put a check next to the one that they wanted, that was most important to them. And what we learned, it depends on where you sit. So police and fire have a smaller subset of this. So as we're working through this project, we're mapping where these data sources are currently, where we would like them to be, and who needs what. There are common challenges that we've had that as we're moving forward, we're addressing with the cities, access to information. Right now, it's brute force analysis. Like I said, we're pulling from here, we're doing a spreadsheet, we're pulling it all together, but that's a one-time. To systematically do that, you need to build the infrastructure and the capability in order to continue that analysis. Common issues, there's uniform code enforcement, but not uniform data collection. There's lacking in mobile technologies, and the perception is low. It's a profession that they want the, I just saw my 1 minute, I got nervous. They want, through this project, to help elevate the profession, to say, we're out there, we want to work as a whole in our community. The scenarios that contribute most to blight. So there's things in here that we're generating along the way. We said, all right, at least in these 4 cities, they said these 4 scenarios are contributing to blight. We're positive, and that's when we brought in Corporation Counsel. Number 1, a bank-initiated foreclosure that is never completed. 2, a city or county-initiated foreclosure that's never completed. 3, a foreclosure, but the bank does not take the title. And 4, the property is purchased under an LLC. These are the 4 that have caused the most blight. So what we're doing is helping Corporation Counsel come up with strategies to effectively address some of these. The other thing that we're learning is demolition. One day we just talked about demolition. We mapped the process across 4 cities and we say, okay, what's going on? And one of the interesting things was we said, how many vacant properties do you have right now? And if you had the money and the resources, how many need to come down today? They're so structurally unsafe. They told us that. And then we said, how much is it costing? It costs anywhere from $25,000 to $75,000 for demolition. Let's take about $45 million and average out how much that would be. And the group said, for these 4 cities, just to get to a baseline, it would be about $30 million just to take down the structures that are not salvageable. So as we move forward, we have several projects that are spin-offs, learning. We have Albany Law School doing a project with the informatics in the city of Albany and the city of Schenectady. Many presentations, some postdoctoral research in foreclosure, and invited journal articles. And so I'm sorry I took a minute over your time, but if there's any questions, we have the handout that the slide that you couldn't see. If anybody would like that, Meghan, raise your hand. She can certainly give you one, but thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm going to be extremely brief as my role is to introduce my colleagues, but I want to very briefly say thank you to Michael, who has been a stalwart in understanding and studying local government for my entire career as a colleague and friend, and thank you to Bob, and thanks to the Rockefeller Institute, which I was present at the creation and I value extraordinarily as a gathering place for studying and learning about ideas. We do contract research, funded research by foundations, funded research through local governments by the state. in response to regional challenges and needs. And this particular project was initiated when I was approached by the controller of this county who wanted to do a unique kind of intergovernmental collaboration analysis that's worker-based on the individual level, with the individual as the unit of analysis. Simultaneously, or near simultaneously, and this is a county-funded project, and the other governments were invited in without cost, which I think was a very important aspect of this, because local skin in the game is valuable in focusing. And I'm grateful to Mike Connors and his colleagues for advancing the project. Near simultaneously, the state passed a law that created certain expectations of savings relative to property tax levy for local governments, and we took on that as part of our project. And we're going to talk to you today, two of my colleagues are going to talk to you today about how that project proceeded to success in the first instance, creating collaboration on demonstrating savings so that local citizens could get property tax advantages and rebates for virtually all the municipalities in Albany County. And we're going to talk to you about the aspect of the project still in progress, which I think is the challenging and intellectually important and operationally important for local governments seeking to collaborate to save money in an austere fiscal environment. So first, my colleagues are Tom Cetrino and KT Tobin. Tom is a great friend, known to many in Albany for his career here and working with us, and KT is a colleague at the Institute, my deputy. Tom.
Okay.
You want the
Which one? You want to talk to that one?
It's speaking when you push it.
Tom, do you want
Yeah.
want the printed version?
No.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. Now I have it right.
Okay.
Okay. As Jerry said, this project started, funded entirely by the county. Let me move this way so you can hear me. There were three aspects to the project. First aspect was to develop a database of the entire workforce of all local governments within Albany County, and also where services were delivered within Albany County. So that required us getting data from 18 different municipalities and the exact same data from each one. At the same time, the state then required local governments to put together something called government efficiency plans in order for property taxpayers to get rebates on their property taxes over the next several years. We saw that as an opportunity to get local governments to cooperate with us in this project because, frankly, that's a difficult task for many local governments to do, to document what kinds of collaborations they've done and document how much that has saved. And we figured by doing that for them, they would better cooperate with us on the second stage of the project. So we did get every local government and several special districts, fire, and everybody that is governed by the property tax cap had to file a government efficiency plan if their taxpayers were to get a rebate on their property taxes. So that includes special districts, which are often a forgotten part of local government, particularly fire districts have large property tax levies. Some of them, or many of them, do not abide by the property tax cap, and therefore, if they didn't abide by the property tax cap, they couldn't get a rebate on their taxes. But we did get every municipality and 5 fire and 6 library districts in Albany County to cooperate on a countywide government efficiency plan. We also have an advisory committee of each level of local government. So when we're doing this second stage of the project, we can get input directly from the local government leaders. In addition, the county controller, Mike Connors, has designated a person, Frank Camiso, whose job is primarily to work on this project. The first few months of the project was going down and meeting with local government officials right where they work. at their town halls and village halls to gather the information on what collaborations they have done, and then to work with them to figure out how much money that saves. Now, the city and the county have pretty big professional staffs that can pull together that information without a lot of help. And two of the bigger towns, Guilderland and Colony, could also do that. But the rest of the towns and villages had really no idea how to go about doing it, and were very happy to let us do it and to go through their data and to work with them to figure out what those savings were. Many of the local governments, and particularly in the hill towns, which the western part of the county, right, they don't have a lot of expertise, so they needed a lot of help. So anyways, we documented the information. I think the reason why we got a lot of cooperation is we were doing what they viewed as an onerous project, necessary to get money for their taxpayers at no cost to them, and all they had to do was let us go to their town halls and talk to them, and we pulled the data together. So, the state only gave us a target of documenting $2.4 million in collaboration savings and efficiencies in Albany County since 2012, which is when the property tax cap went into effect. We were able to document $56.2 million in savings. In other words, on an average annual basis, that's $18.6 million, far in excess of what the state had to document. What did surprise me is that the Division of Budget did read the plans, actually, and actually disallowed some of our savings, like maybe $1 million out of the $18 million. So it was interesting that the state took this serious enough to take, because we spent a long time entering that information into a state database, and we were surprised that they looked at it as closely as they did. What came out of our first, besides documenting what they've already done, we got them to think about what else could we do. And two things came out of that that both have significant cost savings. One would be a consolidated dispatch system. Albany County already consolidates dispatch for Queens, Cohoes, Green Island, and Waterville. And Bethlehem and Guilderland are seriously thinking about either joining the county or doing their own. So they want to do further collaboration with that. The city of Albany has been asked by the State Financial Review Board to, in fact, do more consolidated dispatch with their local governments, and they are working with that. The second thing that came out was to develop a joint enterprise resource planning system, something that might be interesting to you guys. Local governments keep the same information in many, many different ways and in different levels of sophistication. The hill towns in Knox will have almost like a paper record of data, whereas Bethlehem will have a nice spreadsheet program. But to get all that data together, an ERP system where you could standardize the information and be able to share it across governments is something not only local governments are interested in, but will also help us in the second part of our project that KT is going to talk about. But none of those things are cheap to do, Carl. None of them are cheap. So in order for us to move forward in that, the local governments in Albany County are going to need some significant financial assistance. And since the State Financial Review Board has asked the city of Albany to do this, we anticipate that happening. Okay, KT. Now to the workforce.
So the next phase of this study is to assemble what we're calling a workforce database, which is to take individual level data at the very micro level, work order level data, so that we can then scale it up to a larger level of analysis so that municipalities aren't just making decisions at their level, but can look at the data at a higher level so we can see where there's patterns and opportunities for efficiencies across municipalities. So we're in the process. We have a lot of data, like Tom was saying, it was easy to get data from the city and from the county. They have standardized ways of doing these things. We were lucky enough that a couple of our municipalities even used the same software for things like payroll and employee management, so we could get a couple of those. So we will literally, when we're done, have a file of every single worker in the county so that analysis and decisions can be made at that level and not just at the local level. So what we're going to do once we get all the workers is then to look at them by function, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And two of the big deliverables are the analytics, looking at the data this way, but also mapping, so that we can visualize it in that way. So our goal, it's really important for us to be strong in our statement, is that yes, we're looking at staffing, and yes, we're looking at doing staffing differently, but the idea is to not reduce service levels. It's an important kind of overview to the project that we reiterate whenever we talk about the project. So we'll be performing cost-benefit analysis, and we're looking because, we know that we need to reduce spending, and we know that staffing is a considerable portion of everybody's budget, that we reduce the spending in this area significantly over the next 5 years and even longer term. So we know that there are functions that every local government, well, let me correct that. Not every local government does all of them, but that we have pretty consistent functions of things that local government need to deliver. So what we want to do is take all the data, and this is all the municipalities in Albany County, and to put that into this larger workforce pool, and then to drop down and look again at it by function. So when we look at it by function, we can look at how we're delivering this service at a county-wide level. So when we look at it by function county-wide, we can see the who, what, and where. What does the workforce look like from this higher bird's eye view than just looking at the local level? So we're collecting things like how long employees have been employed at places, the type of employment they're doing, how they're geographically distributed, and what is the cost for this. So when we get to this, when we get this data and we have this ability to analyze it, we can look at service levels, and we can do this kind of employment modeling at the county level, so we can look and see where are there overlaps and potential for shared employees. Maybe 2 municipalities each have part-time workers, and we can put that together. Or maybe there's so many different scenarios that we can't see because we don't look at the information at this level. So where a lot of savings that people tried to find over the past 5 to 10 years has been in retirement incentives. Where would we see might it be helpful to entice people to retire, but also where would it be helpful to entice people to retire but also work part-time so we don't lose that institutional memory? And then trying to think innovatively about how we do rehiring and just managing the labor pool at this county level. So a lot of what Meghan was saying, I was like, yep, because the data challenges are considerable. There's lack of standardization. There's lack of capacity in certain places. It sounds really simple. Oh, just give us a file of all your employees. A couple things that I neglected to put on this chart that I would add are, a lot of people, as soon as we got done with the GEP plans, people got distracted with elections and with putting their budgets together because their towns do their budgets at the end of the year. There's the additional issue of privacy with this type of data, but on the other hand, it's also public data because this is public spending. So I'm being told to wrap up. We will be here for questions.
So I'm a dean, so the real brains are at home doing the work. But I'm quite pleased to be here, and I'm going to switch us up a little bit in the sense that I'm not going to talk about a single project. I'm going to talk about what turns out to be something close to 17 years of work building an infrastructure for Western New York, at least in 2 to 5 counties and in the city of Buffalo in particular. And the question is, how do you build a planning infrastructure over that time that actually ultimately starts to feel like it's getting some traction? I work out of a unit in our school at the School of Architecture and Planning called the UB Regional Institute. That institute has an evolution that started with something impossibly named the Institute for Local Governance and Regional Growth. That grew into a shorter version of that called the Regional Institute. And when I became dean 5 years ago, I merged it with a 20-year-long project called the Urban Design Project, which was an exploration of urban design in our region, where we used the region as a teaching and research laboratory. So we have this hybrid organization whose job it is to provide support and decision support in particular through data for public policy, urban planning, and design. That's an interesting slide. It's not going. What's that?
Maybe backwards, that's what happened with me.
Aha, got it. Thank you. There we go. Flip it around. Thank you. You just did that, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
This is terrific. So what drives us at the Institute is pretty straightforward. We are firmly convinced that you can't manage what you can't measure, and sort of decision-making and policy action really requires that. We're also very vested as architects and planners in evidence-based design for great places, ensuring broad and meaningful public participation, viewing our projects as essential democratic projects in our region. All of that comes from a kind of requirement to support those 3 categories of work with the idea that we make complex data understandable at every level of our community. So what do? It's pretty straightforward. It's information and analysis, market research and impact assessments, program and infrastructure evaluations, geospatial and suitability analysis. There's that lovely phrase of spatial efficiency, which is somehow really about making good places, urban design, physical planning, and communications outreach. The sort of 17 years I spoke of, starting from 1999 and spreading through to today, involved a series of parallel activities, some by the Institute for Local Governance and Regional Growth, which were predicated on the notion that you really can't measure progress unless you establish a baseline. So we spent a lot of effort in something called the State of the Region, clear back in 2002 and 2003. It was one of those places where the data that existed didn't seem to tell the real story about the depth of problems we were facing in Western New York, and you kept asking the question the same way over and over again, getting the same answer, and really not being able to advance very far. So here we asked the question through 100+ people participating in many task groups across our 2-county region, but fundamentally focused in Erie County as a place to start. That gave us a good database, but it didn't give us a way to keep that data current and alive over time. In parallel with that, we began to look at the process of development that was occurring in our county and city in particular. And as you might guess, it was a process that born of considerable desperation. We were throwing paint on the canvas and cutting ribbons on Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, it was a tough time, and not a lot was going on economically or in the world of development. But we still had a notion that there were strengths to build on, and we needed to identify where they were, how we were currently investing, throwing paint on the canvas, and how to think about the spatial efficiencies that come from a really strategic focus on building on your strengths. Out of that grew a number of national and international award-winning planning efforts that focused on our downtown first, and even then not as a plan, but as let's just demonstrate to the public and to the civic society and to the folks that work in our government that we can actually do stuff. So we took 15 high-priority projects and watched the paint dry for 3 years, kind of shoving stuff out of the way, making things happen, demonstrating real ability to take action that meant something to the publics that we were serving. Those actions with an academic at the helm meant you were watching yourself do that. And at some point, we looked at the files and said, it's starting to look like a plan and walk like a plan and talk like a plan. Let's see if we can build one out of it. And there we built a core downtown strategy for our downtown. Then what followed was waterfront strategy, parks and parkway system strategy, and the first comprehensive plan for the city of Buffalo in 35 years. So it was that center body of work that occurred from about 1999 at a start through to 2008 as that sequence of documents all incorporated in the comprehensive plan were produced and guided core action. The next step was the Regional Economic Development Council, fed initially by a follow-on to the State of the Region, which was an examination of our two-county, Erie and Niagara County, and a framework for regional growth. That effort set the stage for then a series of things that the Regional Economic Development Council took ownership of. One dealt with the idea of the prosperity plan itself, the first of the planning series from the REDC. And the second was, that was fun. We seemed to bring home some cash. It was a good effort. Can we now imagine what we would do if we had $1 billion and could leverage it at least 5 to 1? And that led to a second economic development plan. So in that second bundle of documents, you had physical planning. In the third bundle of documents, you had the economic development planning, each housed with the same data set and the same basic team working back office to the leadership. Now you've got a coordinated economic and physical development planning effort to die for. That all based on the baseline work that came from the first set of documents. So out of all of that came a number of kind of research questions that we looked at. Obviously, we were interested in our baseline. We were interested in where we were, where our strengths were, what we could build on, how we could amass that, and in the future, to evaluate progress and reevaluate strategies as we go, all with an attitude of learn by doing. Our theory and practice is to develop meaningful and effective solutions with our partnerships at the local, state, and national organization. One of the things that came to us through this process was a federal grant for sustainable communities, which gave us a license to develop a two-county regional sustainability plan that brought the environmental focus to bear on that same family of economic development documents and physical planning documents. So now we've got federal, state, and local all singing in the same sentence. And not a usual thing for us in Western New York, but we were kind of enjoying the symmetry of it all. Out of the One Region Forward sustainable work, we brought the kind of good faith and credit of HUD, of the Department of Transportation, and the Environmental Protection Agency to bear on several focus areas, looking at these two counties, 64 municipalities, and 3 Indian nations. And we're on the border with Canada, but it's harder for Erie and Niagara County to talk to each other than it is for us to talk to Canada. You kind of understand that dynamic. As we looked at that, the collaboration and coordination across meant we, again, as academics, took a look at, well, what's the planning base we're starting with at this moment, which was about 2012. And we found 160 documents that seemed to be the current planning framework for those 64 municipalities. We read them all. We did the content analysis, and then we took them back to the public along with a kind of land use map for all 64 counties. So you could see county by county the logical inconsistencies across it. And we basically asked our legislative committees and our civic society committees and the general public, are you doing that on purpose? Really? Shouldn't we think about that a different way? Those conversations took us to a much better understanding of where there was common ground across the 64 municipalities and where we differed dramatically. The notion was in that planning exercise never to tell a municipality what it had to do with its land use, but rather to give them data about the consequences of the decisions they were making. And so a lot of this, and I'll get to that in a minute, were aimed at tool building. All of this aligned at the state level and leveraging federal resources. Building the future and planning a network to make it happen was the process. This is one of those projects where you really need an academic institution with an army of students at the graduate level and PhD level. We went to every food fair and festival for 2 summers. We tabled this project. We asked people over and over and over again, where's the value set of this community? Where's it centered? What kinds of things have to change in your world? Over 30 community events, fairs, and festivals. We did Text It Forward. We did technology I've never seen before in Facebook and Twitter. We trained our citizens through a citizen planning school and an advocacy base so that they could take that data home to their individual municipality and argue and advocate for a more sustainable place. 27 workshops to map our future. Lots of alternative scenario building work. Well over 50 presentations to local organizations, all taking us to a narrative piece called One Region Forward. Those that help shape the strategies will also be part of the teams that implement them, so that the Development Implementation Council also became the kind of concluding group that absorbs these tools, keeps them up to date, and reports progress on a regular basis. The 5 big ideas, guess what? Land use, transportation, food system security, climate change, housing and neighborhoods, all kind of physical in their base that fed the smart growth agenda that was also embedded in the Prosperity Plan and the Buffalo Billion Economic Development Investment Plan. Those big ideas gave us a kind of concluding piece to inform, connect, and advance community values. And out of it came a whole kind of library of analytics reported by topic, community and stakeholder reviews showing where they actually agreed in more things than they thought, mapping exercises, scenario planning, new networks of communities, and the kind of establishment of relationship across a region was really key, and of course the performance metrics. Taking folks to school, not just in general as a kind of lecture, discussion, panel format, but also rising up citizen championships and supporting them in advancing individual things that mattered in their neighborhood as a part of this base. So facilitating that effort, looking at before and after relative to strategy, took us to this network, building on the tools and continuing the work of that thousands had been part of in that 164 base of planning that we worked with. Out of that, then in related to that, coming up in parallel was our Strategy for Prosperity Plan. It was one of 2 best plans in the state as it was reported to us. I'm not sure we cared about that, but we really liked the $120 million we took home with it. That was fun. Let's do it again. Took us to the Buffalo Billion. But our Prosperity Plan was, again, like the physical planning, building on the strengths, creating jobs, and investing in the future. It was really a very careful sector analysis. We tried to look at the things that would facilitate that development. Where do we have our core strengths as a starting point, and what data supports those core strengths? The first time they brought those 5 counties together and they sat them around in the Regional Economic Development Council, this was a group of 32 people that almost never sat down in the same room together. It's how are you going to do that? And again, it's nice to have a university center that's not going home when the job's done, coming in as part of the underpinning of that work. As we took that the next step, the tools that came out of that supported the work of the council. Again, ongoing support, back office, behind the curtain. This is the council's product. The analysis of real data that are readily available for an annual progress report. The community and stakeholder engagements were well structured. Strategic alignments between the federal, state, and local as part of that. Implementation work through performance metrics. The organizing strategy, the 3 core ones, are the workforce, and there's a series, and again, a library of investigations about where we were in workforce and what needed to happen. This fostering a culture of entrepreneurship, which took us to kind of the world's largest business plan competition, go figure, now in its 3rd year. And a kind of process by which we implement smart growth through a smart growth scorecard and tie it back to the One Region Forward sustainable plan. The sector strategies that emerged out of some 64 possibilities were very specific to who we are and what our strengths are. Advanced manufacturing, agriculture, binational logistics, energy, life and health sciences, professional services, and tourism. As we found by looking statewide, we're seeing a very different array, section by section, REDC by REDC. The outcomes of that really was that kind of $1 billion investment plan, which we developed with the Brookings Institute and McKinsey. They did a great job with us in that process, and our work with the Institute, Brookings and McKinsey went home, we're still here, and that's what we do. The job creation and investment since 2011, the Western New York Regional Economic Development Council has been awarded $763 million in state funding. 7,000 jobs came out of that, leveraging $2.9 billion in private sector investment, retaining over 12,000 jobs. We take pride as academics at being able to construct the data behind each one of those numbers. So we like those kind of outcomes. We also like what seemed like de minimis in any one year, but after 46 months of month-over-month job growth, we see a kind of trend we haven't seen since World War II in Western New York. Those kinds of patterns in terms of where are you in the total number of jobs, the total number of firms, the wages earned, and the average salaries all give us a sense of some significant progress now into our 4th year in this work. Beyond Buffalo, then came the invitation to go to the 7 regions across upstate and lay in the same data foundation. So they've got a kind of comparative base to work from across the region. You've been patient. My time is up. Lots of takeaways here. Being relevant, adding value, staying objective, and independent count. Thanks for your patience.
Questions? We're going to be getting a mic around to here. I guess everybody but Robert has had a chance to catch their breath. Sounds like we were pushing people on the time here. I think we have one in the back there.
Yeah, I had a question relating to the Albany County Intergovernmental Cooperation effort in terms of the sharing of employees. How much of the analysis considered the effect of labor unions, and was that factored at all in the collective bargaining units at the municipal level, how they deal with merging those jobs in light of the realities of those collective bargaining agreements?
Yes. No, it's one of the things that KT came
Hey,
down
Tom, can we get you at a mic, either here or there?
I'll use this one. Is that okay?
Sure.
The answer is yes. We do have union representation on our advisory board and are involving the major unions in our planning. So the answer is yes.
Let me add that The entire premise is that there'll be voluntary action, incentivized voluntary action by workers. You know, it's not. There's a premise that there are not going to be layoffs, involuntary action by workers. But we think that when we figure out where people work, what the overlapping tasks are, what the opportunities are, all governments do this one government at a time. Our premise is when they do it many governments at a time, new opportunities will arise for them.
I had a very similar question. In your table, you had a $18 million average saving per year versus the $2.5 million which state projected. And that's a big difference. And if you could really, that's a potential saving, I believe, right?
No, no, that's since 2012. The various municipalities in Albany County have either through shared services or other collaborations or through efficiencies have saved and will continue to save, because they're ongoing savings, the $18.6 million on an average annual basis for fiscal years 2016, 17, and 18. So those are actions already taken that they've done. What we did was document what they've done. What we have found is that a lot of shared services occur at the local level that is not necessarily documented. Up in the hill towns, you'll find them sharing various highway equipment all the time, which they find is sort of necessary in order to get the job done. But they never thought of, gee, this is really sharing services and we should really document what this savings is. But we helped them do that by simply going there and talking to the people that did the work so we could document what they already did. And what they already did was much bigger than what people expected, right?
The premise of the state policy is that local governments are inefficient and they have to be compelled to be efficient. That's the premise. And in fact, I urged in many speeches across the state and in this project for the local governments to be welcoming of being thrown into the briar patch, because they could demonstrate that they're operationally advancing the values that the state is trying to incentivize. And by doing that, they can also identify other opportunities where they need investments to help them be further efficient. And that was so it was a kind of a turnabout notion behind this. Take this premise, challenge it, demonstrate your performance, and then demonstrate how else you can, in other ways you can perform well if you get the front-end assistance with the capital investments or the cash investments you need. So the policy, these are not neutral environment. This was not our principal purpose when we undertook this with Mike Connors in the first instance, but it was an opportunity that arose in the course of the project that we seized upon.
I have a question back here.
Hey, my name's Kevin Bronner. I'm from the University at Albany, and I teach a class in cost accounting. And we focus on local governments. We've studied your Benjamin report, and what I'm really interested in, one of your slides said that you're going to do benefit cost analysis. Could you elaborate a little bit on how those will look, and maybe the level of detail? Is it going to be for every recommendation, most of the recommendations, or some of them?
Well, our first challenge is to get the data, as we pointed out, and we're right in the midst of that. But we're going to examine what it would cost in a function-specific way with collaborations within regions of the county, what it costs now to deliver services in aggregate by the governments. So we're going to figure out, for example, how much it costs to plow roads by those governments collaborating, and what would happen if not collaborating, what would happen if the workforce, what opportunities are there in workforce retirements, part-time use of personnel to plow roads at lower personnel costs and maybe lower equipment costs, if we can encourage those kinds of decisions by employees. So what does it cost now? What would the net benefit be from doing it a different way? And what incentives could be offered to cause it to be done that way? And what would be the cost of those incentives? So it would be roughly how we would proceed. And we're going to proceed function by function. I don't think we're going to be able to proceed through the universe of functions provided by governments. We're going to find those targets that are most promising and focus upon them in the first instance. I didn't see who the questioner was. I couldn't.
It's to your left.
Oh, no wonder I couldn't see. I was looking in the wrong place. So I hope that satisfies you, but
Chris Anderson, Association of Towns. The Efficiency Plan program had two components, one a retroactive analysis and a prospective projection. Of the 18 million in the Albany County, did you have a breakout that was prospective? And of that cohort, did you find that there were elements that maybe could be translated elsewhere? Would that sort of transformational change? Love to hear about that. Thank you.
I brought the plan, so I could, it's hard to explain in 15 minutes, everything that we've been doing. So of that 18 million, 5.8 were things that were already underway. 2.8 were things that could be done in the future. And the two things that we found that we thought could be built upon were the two things I mentioned: dispatch, which is already being done, and that is a huge cost savings as related to dispatch. So building upon what Albany County has already done. And then the enterprise resource system, having a system where it makes it easier to share workforce data across municipalities. Albany County already has a system that Rensselaerville and Bern use, the same accounting system. But in order for the city of Albany to use it, it will have to be a different kind of accounting system. So trying to build that enterprise resource, those are the two things we think would have the best bang for the buck in the short term.
well, there's another interesting point that's perhaps non-responsive, but I thought I'd mention it. Places would say to us, we've been doing this a long time, and you're starting to count at a particular time after we did it all. And so we're not credited for that. So we did give them the opportunity to tell us what they had accomplished, and we reported on it. So as to buttress the report, even though the numbers didn't count. And I think this has been I've been elected official in county government in my career, and I've interacted with local governments a lot, other local governments a lot. And this is an attempt to take an affirmative path in dealing with the various tensions and expectations that the state has upon the locality and the localities have for the state, rather than a path you're making us do something that we don't want to do, and we're, rather than taking a negative focus on the relation, try to create an affirmative context for the interaction by saying we have something to report, even though you didn't ask us to report it, we're reporting it so you understand us and that our values are synchronous with your values.
I have a question I want to ask. Meghan, in your work with the group of cities that you worked with, you mentioned that you did some upfront cost work. To what extent was that a motivating factor for people to say, we want to engage in this project to deal with blight on a more consistent basis?
Well, I think all four cities had knew that they were spending a tremendous amount of money in these properties, but until you get everyone together from all across the departments and start figuring out how much they're spending, and the goal was not to get down to the nitty gritty and say it's exactly this dollar amount. It was an approximation. It was to get an overall picture and all those people in the room. And a statement I heard Robert make was that it's the first time you've gathered all those people in the room to talk about the topic, and that's a lot of what we did in the beginning of this project. So it was also one of the determining factors when you look across the cities of how much you're spending and saying, okay, it makes the project more worthwhile. It is an information challenge. And it was quite enlightening to everyone in the room, although the mayors kind of already knew that.
Let me throw out a proposition. My name is John Batchelor, to Dr. Benjamin and his team, and a question. When I think about the shared services project, I think that when you think about Albany County, most of the people live in large units of government: Albany, Colony, Guilderland, Bethlehem. But the benefits probably of shared services are most accrue to the small units, like the ones in the hill towns. The benefits for the larger units are probably internal. In other words, if you think about how do you make your internal organization benefit rather than by sharing services. Do you think that's an accurate representation, or would you disagree with it?
Well, it's partly so. I think that one thing we said was, in selling this, I was amazed to learn that there's actually politics in Albany County. And I also learned that not everybody at the head of a government likes everybody else at the head of a government. So this achievement should not be undervalued, that they all came along. And it was really a context provided by the state, either purposefully or inadvertently, that allowed that to happen. We exploited that opportunity. In dollar terms, the value to smaller places is low, and one of the problems with incentive, our taxpayers won't save much. They'll get a check for 13 cents. Why should we do this? In relationship terms and in creating opportunity terms, the value for small places is very high. The value for bigger places is probably substantial with regard to the specific examples that we gave, is definitely substantial regarding the specific examples that Tom identified. Those were not the only examples that we identified, but those are the ones we chose to focus upon. And the ancillary costs of including others are small. So there's a goodwill political incentive to include smaller places by ambitious politicians who might want to have relationships with those places going forward, and a low cost to doing that for the bigger places. So I'm not sure that that you could sort it out that way, that the opportunities for the bigger places are entirely internal and the opportunities for the smaller places are largely collaborative. I'm thinking out loud in response to the question. I don't have a decisive point of view about it. Tom, I don't know if you want to.
For dispatch.
Right.
Dispatch will say, hopefully, no. I know you're taping this, and my voice, while loud, doesn't probably make it to the tape. Dispatch has a lot of savings for Guilderland and Bethlehem and Colony and all the other big towns. That would be a huge savings if you can find a way to do it, which keeps the collective bargaining agreements, and luckily we have in Albany County a pattern, and we've got Sheriff Apple's county, and he's brought in some pretty big places. So we'll see.
Let me say one other thing. There's a major challenge in New York State on emergency medical response now, and we didn't focus on that in this study, but I'm getting very interested in that in the Hudson Valley. And there's a win-win for a large number of jurisdictions, large and small, in redefining the way that's done, the public-private relationship, the volunteer paid staffing issues, and the constraints placed upon that response by municipal boundaries, both for big places and small places, is challenging and problematic. So, by way of saying, the way we're thinking about this and the questions this opened up are broadly applicable, way beyond what we were able to or willing to, within the time constraint, pay attention to.
Right. Can I?
We have
I'm
to-
sorry, Michael.
oh, go
Can I
ahead,
just
jump
weigh
in.
in quickly? Thinking about this a different way, a lot of the questions that we get at CTG are thinking about in the area of shared services. And when you're working with the CIOs and the IT leaders from across New York State, many times it's not shared services is what they're looking to do. So we spend a lot of time at CTG talking about what managed services are and how that's different than a shared service. And also, a collaborative or cooperative venture is very different than a shared service. So while everyone, talks about shared services, we spend a lot of our time getting people together and parsing out what they mean, because a lot of times it's not actually joining in a joint cost, joint risk venture together. It's more of a managed service, or if it's more of a collaborative effort that doesn't have those financial implications. So the spectrum is large. And so we help guide them in their thinking of what they're planning to do.
Thank you, everyone. You're going to have about 50 minutes to ask questions of our speakers. We're going to break for lunch. And we're going to reconvene about 12:40. Is that right? Yes, 12:40. Can we give our speakers a hand? Thank you very much. That was very, very valuable.